all it took was, this 100 drones in order to knock those out. And it's just a really stark moment, because you think of, the ability to attack another country over long distances. That's supposed to be the province of very strong governments. You don't think of smaller nations or weak nations being able to do that. And I think it just opens a whole Pandora's box.
Now, we'll see what happens. But not only have they rewritten the rules of war, they may have rewritten the rules of commerce.
I don't have a simple answer to your question. I don't think the United States is collapsing or falling apart at the seams. I don't think we're on the verge of civil war, but boy, are we engaging in some own goals.
The better-than-expected U.S. jobs report sparked a rally that pushed the S&P 500 to 6,000, but are investors seeing the whole picture? Hi, everyone. I'm Maggie Lake. Welcome to the Friday edition of Talking Markets. Stocks are up, yields are up, President Trump is publicly pressuring the Fed to cut rates, Elon Musk keeps tweeting, and it's still Friday morning as I record this. Pretty par for the course in this environment where a week sometimes feels like a year, which is why this summer we're trying to end each week focusing on issues that maybe didn't get the airtime they deserve. This Friday, the focus is on geopolitics. Are investors too complacent about the pressures building on a fractured global system? I asked Dee Smith, CEO and founder of Strategic Insight Group, and Jacob Shapiro, head of Geopolitical and Macro at the Bespoke Group, to give us their latest risk assessment of the global economy, starting with the fallout from Ukraine's strike on Russia, Operation Spider's Web, which Jacob called the most important development of 2025.
This Ukrainian drone attack on Russia's conventional air force over last weekend was one of the rare moments where I feel like usually when I'm speaking to media or in other sort of settings, I'm the one who's being like, all right, take a chill pill. This is fine. Let's not over-index on World War III and all these other things. But this one, I sat up in my chair and I was like, do I understand anything about the military balance of power in the world at all? Because I think it's worth to just describe what the Ukrainians did. So with roughly 100 drones, each one of them, which cost roughly $600 a pop, they struck 5 or 6 different air bases inside of Russia across the country. So some as far away as, towards the Pacific, others closer to Moscow. And it depends whose numbers you trust, but knocked out, around a third of Russia's strategic bomber Air Force fleet. So, these are bombers that have been bombing Kyiv and other Ukrainian cities. These are theoretically bombers that would at least, part of Russia's nuclear triad. And, all it took was, this 100 drones, in order to knock those out. And it's just a really stark moment, because you think of, the ability to attack another country over long distances. That's supposed to be the province of very strong governments. You don't think of smaller nations or weak nations being able to do that. And I think it just opens a whole Pandora's box, everything from small nations fighting other nations to non-state actors getting their hands on things like that. What if Mexican drug cartels decide they want to operationalize drones this way and attack Mexico's conventional military? What if you get, 5-10 years, if we sort of extrapolate out what development of this type of technology looks like? Assassinations seem like they could become extremely easy. So do you get targeted drone-led assassinations on different politicians? And what does that mean for the grand balance of power in the world? So just a very, very stark moment. And I think we're remiss maybe in saying that it's such a big change. We've seen little breadcrumbs about this over the past couple of years. Think of the way that Israel operationalized supply chains to attack Hezbollah leadership by putting explosives in pager devices. Think about the fact that the Houthis, a non-state actor in Yemen, have been sitting there firing rockets and missiles at Israel or at shipping going through the Persian Gulf since literally, October 2023. Biden couldn't stop them. The Trump administration tried to bomb them. That didn't stop them. They're still just sitting there. So non-state actor versus the strongest military the world's ever seen. Non-state actor wins. So you start piling these breadcrumbs together. I think it says some really interesting things about the future of military power in the world, how we think about countries in terms of their relative strength, and what this technology means going forward.
Is what happened with the Ukrainian spiderweb attack into Russia, because those were all basically, they basically went through shipping and through, probably trucks. The information we have said, although possibly some shipping containers, but it was goods being shipped, and these things were hidden in them. Now we'll see what happens. But not only have they rewritten the rules of war, they may have rewritten the rules of commerce, because you think of the thousands of shipping containers that come into the U.S. per day from China, let's say. And do we know if there's sleepers in there? And and every military base in the world, what we've seen, and this was already true, but they are vulnerable to these weapons. They are utterly unprepared to defend against. And drone swarms and other kind. There are many kinds of drones. There are drones that go on the surface of the water. They go under the water. There are drones that roll silently along and then create a huge explosion. And so drones aren't just things that fly through the air, although that's the way we think of them. But the fact that they successfully got that many drones and were able to attack across that wide a swath of Russia changes the game fundamentally. And all of the militaries, certainly including the U.S., but really all of them, have built these giant machines to combat at a very heavy level. And that's not what war is going to look like in the future. So, we're all going to be catching up.
What do you think the conversation is around at the Pentagon, in Europe, around the NATO table? What do you think people are discussing now that they've seen what's possible?
I think they're discussing all sorts of things, but I think one of them is that it's going to require a different system of procurement than what we have. And I'll give you an example. The U.S. Navy developed several years ago a system of directed energy weapons, lasers, to destroy drones and certain kinds of missiles. They can destroy a drone for about $30-$40 a pop. What they've been using in the Red Sea against the Houthi drones are missiles that cost north of $500,000 and up to $3 million for one. So one shot of a laser can do what a missile that then gets destroyed, and the laser can be used again. And the reason that those lasers aren't on many Navy ships is because the Naval Budget Office had never budgeted for lasers, so they didn't know how to budget it. So the Navy can't have lasers because it never had lasers. That kind of thing has got to stop. And that's one element. The other element is that these legacy systems are, they are politically bound into certain things where, this senator from Kentucky, and there's a plant in Kentucky that makes some old thing, and he doesn't want to, he's going to fight for the life to the life for it because it would, his constituents might kick him out of office. So, and that's replicated over hundreds and hundreds of things. And of course, the companies don't want to lose the business either. So it's like turning the Queen Mary. I mean, it just, it's very difficult. But I think this may be enough of a jolt that people, certainly if something like that happened on American soil, but
It
it's
seems
not
an
going to be.
inevitability that it will. Is that
There's
just
an
me being
inevitability.
paranoid?
Yeah, no, that there is an inevitability that it will.
We have the big beautiful spending bill going through, which still earmarks billions for defense. You have Europeans ramping up, opening up their budget caps to pour money into defense. Are they all building and arming themselves in a reality that doesn't exist anymore? Is that so backward looking?
To some extent, but there are new systems in there, and there are things that are more towards the current threats. But the bulk, the heavy suitcase, is these legacy systems, and it's going to it is what you said. It's the political legacy of these systems, and it's like when all you have is a hammer, everything's a nail. They have what they have. They have big bombers, and they have fighter jets, and they have ships of and aircraft carriers and so forth. And so that's the war they're prepared to fight. Well, meanwhile, and that's true of Russia and China too. China may be a little bit more farther ahead of us on the drones, but they're still building these massive ships and things. And the more agile forces in the world have moved on and said, look, we can pin down the U.S. Navy in the Red Sea with drones that cost a few $1,000s each, and they have to spend missiles that cost $1 million each. And so it's one of my currently favorite sayings is failure of imagination. And it's a theme I've used in talks and so forth. But what it means is that you're not thinking outside the proverbial box. You're not actually looking at what's going on. And I think you and I have discussed this before. It's tied to something called zero-based analysis, which is you don't take the assumptions. It's very close to Kahneman, who just died, the Nobel Prize winner, Thinking Fast and Slow. And fast thinking gets you in trouble because you use heuristics, which are rules of thumb, which are, the patterns that have happened before. Well, if it happened before, it's likely to happen again. Well, yes, if you went out in the rain before and you got wet, if you go out in the rain again, you probably get wet unless you carry an umbrella. But nevertheless, in many other aspects of life, those are very misleading, and they're completely misleading in a time of change and a time of drastic, radical change, constant and unrelenting and escalating. And so the past is no longer a reference point, and all these weapons of aging systems are they're an exemplar of that kind of process. They're a case study, and it's now that being said, those things, and particularly nuclear missiles, ballistic missiles, can still destroy the world. So it's not like the old things have no potential threat. It's that they have their place, and then there are all these new things that can overpower them in some cases. And so it's a much more complex situation, and they need to probably, I hate to say it, but spend more on defense. They just need to spend it more smartly.
Yeah.
And not just please the political pork barrel.
Do you think that this unexpected development, which has got to be ricocheting around the halls of power as well, if you're sitting up, presumably so is everyone else, do you think that feeds into the other conversations that are going on, whether it be trade or whether it be economic activity and the sort of the dollar, the Swift system, everything? Does it change all of those conversations?
Yeah. By the way, I don't think I would say we're in a trade war quite yet. It's a negotiation, and things aren't going well, and maybe it gets to a war.
That's interesting, because many other people say we're in it. Even Scott Bessent was like, basically at the level we were at. I mean, they stepped back from it, but it looked like a complete embargo. You don't think that?
No, because they stepped back, and because Trump is begging to talk to Xi, and they talked today, Thursday, June 5th, on the phone call, and they're going to talk further. And it seems to me that all the sides are talking. Like a true trade war, you're not going to, it's 100% tariffs one day and 30 the next day, but I talked to Xi, so now we can figure out this, and we're going to make that. That doesn't sound like it could end that way. I think President Trump is overestimating his capacity to get concessions from Xi Jinping. So maybe it goes that way in the long run, but I'm not convinced we're quite there yet. And I also think you give governments too much credit. This is the halls of bureaucracy and inertia. They are trained to think of things. In some ways, it's good for governments to be old-fashioned and conservative, because you don't want them breaking things and embracing new technologies necessarily. I can make that case too. So I'm sure there is some thought about it, but if you look at sort of the priorities that the U.S. government has for supporting its economy, it doesn't support a lot of these things that I'm talking about. China is very different. China is deploying robotics in large scale in factories. China has invested a lot of money in drone technology and air defense technology and things like that, in part because they don't have the conventional superiority that the United States has. So always technological innovation is about strengths and weaknesses, and people using what was a weakness and turning it into a strength and going from there. So no, I'm not convinced that we have a real grasp of what some of these technologies mean and how they're going to affect us and how we prioritize them going forward. I think that's giving the government way too much credit.
Mm. Ian, one of our viewers, wrote in and asked, does the new Polish president alter much in terms of Ukraine, Russia, and the attractiveness of the Polish stock market? Because, of course, that had been an outperformer.
Yeah, I mean that it's fairly long in the tooth. So I hope you had a nice little ride up. I would assume that things are going to come down a little bit from here, but no is the answer to your question. The Polish presidency is a fairly ceremonial position. It confirms what we already knew, which is that Polish society is very divided, and that's an issue that Poland is going to have to metabolize. If I was going to point to you to a recent election that really matters, I would point to South Korea this week, where you had a progressive candidate win pretty handily, not because South Korea is moving progressive, but because of just how awful the previous candidate was. I mean, he tried to declare martial law and seize the country. And so you get this big swell of support for a candidate who otherwise probably wouldn't have been in that position. And the reason it's important is because, he is probably going to be more skeptical of tighter relations with the United States and Japan, whereas the previous administration tried to end some of those conflicts and put those to bed. There've already been reports that North Korea is going to reopen the hotlines and that they're going to be talking again in general. Maybe you'll even get to the point where you're talking about U.S. withdrawal of troops from South Korea. This is something that Trump has talked about for a long time, and South Korea has been a sort of punching bag for Trump for quite some time. And I'm relatively this happened this week, but I sort of feel a little hint of optimism with South Korea because, I mean, there are very few true frontier economic investment opportunities out there. But the biggest one is North Korea. If you could ever get North Korea to not be a necrocracy with, Kim Jong, whatever his face is, sitting there smoking cigarettes and getting fat, like that's like tens of millions of people who are living as if it's the 1950s, who with a little bit of capital and a little bit of, welcome to the 21st century type logic could lead to a boom in South Korea or a boom on the Korean Peninsula. I mean, that's like very, very speculative, but I would look towards South Korea, which has not been an outperformer this year so far, because some stars are lining up there that I think make South Korea, on a risk reward basis, look a little more interesting than it did a week ago.
Since we're on Asia, we've seen a lot of talk and head scratching about Japan. We saw the bond yields hit all-time highs. They're facing an election, if I'm not mistaken, in the summer. A lot of people wondering if, how Japan's going to manage this situation. What are your thoughts there?
This goes back to sort of what we were talking about with the drones and the military technology and whether these things all factor into the halls of power and treasury yields and the value of the dollar. And I think with Japan was our clearest signal yet that multipolarity is here and it's here to stay. After Liberation Day and all of the news about tariffs, Japan was not happy with the United States. And it wasn't happy with the United States because Japan's biggest economic trading partner is China. And so it was Japan's biggest security partner is the United States. And here's the security partner basically, causing problems in the bilateral relationship when it comes to trade, and also pushing Japan to try and put distance between itself and China, which is like, it's not economic suicide for Japan, but you're asking Japan to like incur a lot of economic pain for what? For tariffs from the country that's supposed to be our ally. And that's why, like, it wasn't a surprise that China reacted the way that it did to Trump tariffs. But Japan said, no thanks. We expect these tariffs to go back to where they were before. And by the way, we're not going to disconnect our relations with China at all. Full stop. And if Japan is telling you that, even with everything about Japanese government bonds and yields this and dollar that and yen that, like, that's telling you very clearly that the capacity for the United States to make allies do things that are not necessarily in their interest has significantly atrophied. And you sort of layer on top, okay, so trade is not the lever that the United States thought it was. And maybe even military power is not the lever that the United States thought it was. The dollar is continuing to fall. Treasury yields are continuing to rise. Every single $1 trillion that we add to the deficit, more countries are like, are they ever going to pay that back? Elon and Trump are now feuding in public about this, where once there was harmony, now all the different people in the administration, sort of like we talked about. I think you and I talked about this very early on, where I was like, the first administration this happened, it looked good for about a month, and then all the knives came out and everybody fighting each other, and Trump loved it because he thinks everything is The Apprentice, presiding over people backstabbing each other and then making last minute decisions before he goes and plays golf. So that's how I would integrate Japan into what we're talking about. And for me, Japan remains interesting and has remained interesting for years because Japan is one of these countries that it can sort of stumble along in the doldrums for literally decades. And they call the 1990s the lost decade for Japan. And you could even say lost decades if you add in the 2000s and 2010s. But also look at what Japan did in the 1920s and 30s, or look at the history of the Meiji Restoration period. When Japan thinks its survival is at stake and thinks it's being threatened, it can make hairpin turns and marshal political will in a way that very, very few nations in the world have ever shown the capacity to. And I think the world that is emerging is one that directly threatens the world that Japan has sort of enjoyed for the past 40, 50 years. So I'm looking at Japan, and it's nice. We can talk about all these things around the edges, but I'm looking for, is Japan going to wake up? Are they going to say, hey, the world is changing and we can either change with it and be at the forefront here, or we'll just have to, be a lackey for the United States going forward, or worst case, a lackey for the Chinese going forward. So for me at the geopolitical level, that's where the question of Japan goes. And I think the Ishiba administration, they started with really, really poor approval ratings. There was really nowhere to go but up. But they're starting to do a little bit better. Like they're managing the rice price crisis well. They're making some deals in the diet and things like that. So I think, if you're looking at the trajectory, they're still starting from a very low place, but the trajectory is starting to inch upward. And I think the Ishiba government finally starting to find its feet a little bit.
What are you worried about on the signals you're seeing? What's your spidey sense telling you about what's underappreciated here?
The most worrying signals right at the moment are economic, and because economic nationalism is a prelude to war. It always has been. And I was actually talking to somebody at the Army War College about this, and if you study the history of conflict, it often starts economically, and it often starts with nationalism. And you've got both of those things in play right now. The level of debt and the other side of the coin, the level of credit in the world, not just the U.S. The U.S. is certainly a big part of it, is set up. So this is one of the things I'm hearing, is that it's set up, it's primed to collapse. And it is not 100% certain. Just like if you've got a bad case of cancer, you might live. But it's harder and harder with every passing day to see how it keeps growing, to see how you can successfully contain it if it starts going down. If it starts, by going down, I mean collapsing. And it's, the U.S. for the first time last year spent more on interest payments than it did on the military. And, it's just, and it is striking to me that it's one of those things that falls under the category you were talking about, and that is people they're not paying attention to it. They're ignoring it, and the market's doing well. And, it all reminds me of that. Do you remember that ad that I think Bacardi rum? It was, we're not here for a long time. We're here for a good time. So, I love that quote, but it's that kind of a thing. It's just, well, we're just going to enjoy it while we can and not worry about the future. And that's fine, but then you're going to have to deal with the future when it comes. And will you be prepared?
Well, give me your assessment of the U.S. right now. Because we've got 3 more years of a Trump administration. He's just getting going. Sounds like you're a little bearish on the prospects of, at the very least, him having success with the agenda.
I don't have a simple answer to your question. Like, I don't think the United States is collapsing or falling apart at the seams. I don't think we're on the verge of civil war, but boy, are we engaging in some own goals. Like, we're doing some basic things that I think are going to harm our position in the world and our ability to be at the center of tech innovation and growth in the long term. And it's why, from an investment perspective, I'm advising clients like international over domestic. Make sure that you've got your structure set up so that when future populist governments start coming for you and start taxing you, like you've got some protection there. You might have saw Steve Bannon went on a podcast yesterday and was telling Elon the only way to balance the budget is to tax the rich. That's Steve Bannon saying that. Shows you ideology is a flat circle. He and AOC can hang out and have tax the rich parties or something like that. All reasons that, like, those sorts of things for people who are 5-10 years minded, like, I'm thinking about that. So the
Yeah.
sky is not falling, but it's not a beautiful day either.
Does it seem like if it's more volatile, does it seem like risk is more elevated always now because of the unpredictability of this transition? It seems like it's very hard to see in the future.
That's an interesting question. I think risk is always there, and I'm fundamentally optimistic. Like, I actually think opportunity is here in a way that it hasn't been for years. Like, all the promise around AI and robotics, Internet of Things, that's the biggest, change in technology since the arrival of the internet. We're going through a once in a generation energy transition away from oil as the primary source of energy in the world to, we don't even know what. Is it wind? Is it solar? Is it geothermal? Is it hydrogen? Is it nuclear? Is it all of the above? And then you get, the fracturing of these supply chains and different governments that are going to be throwing money at different projects because they're thinking about things from a national defense perspective. So I guess you could say risks are elevated, but you could say that at literally any time in the market over the past 40 years, even when things were great. I prefer to look at it from the point of view as there's a lot of disruption happening geopolitically, technologically, any adverb that you want to throw in there, like change is happening, and that will destroy some industries and make some opportunities obsolete, but it will also open new ones for people who are thinking sort of further forward. And I think that, when we're dealing with our own clients at Bespoke, like, we spend a lot of time about how to preserve capital and protect capital, especially when you're working with high net worth people. The first job is do no harm, protect what you have. And you have to have a strategy to do that in a world where the dollar is declining and populist government is rising and things like that. But the second charge is, and grow it. And how do you grow it? You don't grow it in the fetal position because you think the world is ending. You have to think that technology is going to continue to change things and make things better. And I think if you look at biotech, the energy transition, some of these left behind emerging markets that maybe now have a time to shine because of these geopolitical issues that I'm talking about. Like, yeah, so risk is elevated, but so is opportunity. So go get some.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. Both of them certainly gave us a lot of food for thought. Appreciate your time as always. Please subscribe and hit the like button. We will be catching up with Doomberg and Katie Stockton in the coming weeks, so please join us for that. Have a great weekend.